Debbie Wexler to be the moderator for this session. This is the COVID-19 and beyond. What are we going to do? What are we going to keep after all of this hopefully ends sometime soon? Again, you have lots of questions, opportunities to ask questions, and I'd like to thank our sponsors.
So anyway, our sponsor for this evening, or for this block of sessions, is Driscoll's. And we are glad to have their sponsorship for this conference. So a big shout out to Driscoll's for doing that. And what we're going to do is we have three panelists. We'll start with Jim Yadley, who is a grower in Michigan, happens also to be president of the NARBA board. Then we'll hear from grower Guy Moore, who's in Maryland at Laryland Farms, and he happens to be a past board member of NARBA. And then we'll hear from Connie Fisk with Produce Safety Alliance, and she's based in Nebraska and covers the whole northwest part of the United States. So we're going to hear from all three of our panelists, and then we'll have some open Q&A. And I want to encourage people that if you want to share what you're doing on your farm, please type that as well into the Q&A, and I'll share it with everybody. It's not a meeting, so you can't, as a listener, interact by face to face or voice by voice. You'll have to do it all through Q&A, but we do want to hear from you. And now I'll turn it over to Jim. So go for it, Jim.
Okay, thanks, Debbie. Well, we're a small grower in Michigan. I consider myself the advocate for small growers on board because everybody else is pretty big. And I don't know if we're ready for 2021 or not, but because I think it's going to be about the same as this past year. At least in Michigan, our governor is pretty strict on, we still got our restaurants are still shut way down. They're only 25% capacity and 2 people at a table. So anything, I don't know what's going to happen this year. We're probably going to be just about what we had to do last year. I have about 2 acres of red raspberries, about a ½ acre of black raspberries, and a few blackberries. We've been doing this for 35 years, just on a small scale. Our son and daughter-in-law joined us last year. Thankfully, their help was really needed, as it turned out. And our dollar amount and the customers that we deal with being all pick your own, we're not really covered under the Food Safety Act, so. But we have always been super conscious of the safety of our product. That's always been a big concern to us, and that continues regardless of what goes on otherwise. So welcome to our farm. Like I said, we're small, so we operate through our garage. Customers in the past have always come in and gone out the same way. We had 2-way traffic through here. They came in, picked up their trays of pints. We used the pulp pints. And when they got done, they came in the same door in the back that they went out. And looking at it now, it was kind of inefficient. So next slide, Joe. So this year, it was 1-way traffic. You went in through the garage door here. We have these little pots separating, keep people at 6-foot intervals. Picked up their stuff and went out the back door to the field. When they came in, they had to walk around and come up to the checkout table on the other side here. So we found out that it's a lot more efficient, easier to deal with the customers, and we're going to be keeping this. The one thing that, I don't know if you can see me on the side here, but I'll be glad when we get rid of these masks. So as it turns out, we used to give out picking pails to the customers to pick into. And we did away with that this year. I'll get back onto that later. Of course, signs were every place this year. Half the people don't read them, but you got them out there anyway. And I hope we'll be able to eventually get rid of most of those. At least we're going to start a website this year, which we've just in the past used Facebook for putting out information, but it's not very good for giving out a lot of information. So we're starting up a Facebook or a website so we can do a better job of communicating with our customers. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, one of the things that we did this year, which actually needed it for the COVID requirements, but also it's a Food Safety Management Act issue too. We've always had hand sanitizer available to our customers and encouraged them to use it. And this year we put these hand washing stations in. My family calls me a pack rat. I keep things, I don't throw much away. I picked up these wash tubs at an auction years ago. Never did figure out what I was going to do with them. And then I thought, I got an idea for this. So I mounted them on these pallets with plywood floor so I can move them with my loader. I bought, if you notice on the floor, there's a foot valve that operates the water supply, so nobody has to use the faucets up above. We bought a hand towel dispenser and a soap dispenser. And I think everything combined probably got less, probably $110 in supplies in each one of those. I plumbed them up through a garden hose up by the entrance and out by the porta-john in the field. I teed off from one of our irrigation main lines to that. So along with the porta-johns, we've always kept them super clean. We use handicap size ones, so it's easy for the mothers to go in with their youngsters. And we started keeping track of what our cleaning schedule was this year, and we'll keep doing that. The hand wash stations will stay for sure. And I guess that's about enough for that. So next slide, please, Joe. We were all ready when we got to our black raspberry season in early July, but we thought we were. When we opened up, we were just deluged with customers. I mean, well, we always knew that the black raspberries were popular with our regular customers, but people just started coming out of the woodwork, and I had to go out in the field and supervise because we don't have a lot of rows, and I had to spread people out. Communicated with the kids back at the garage, told them when hold people up, we don't have room. Somebody left, okay, send them on out and we'll take them. Got room for them now. So as we moved on to the rest of the season then, and our main crop is fall raspberries, we kind of expected we'd be busy, but we had no clue as to what was going to turn out. Boy, it was just super busy. The parking lot was overwhelmed. We normally, a normal season, we have room for about maybe 30 cars easily, and that was always plenty. But the first day that we opened for red raspberries, we had cars. My driveway is about 1,000 foot long to the road up to our main parking spot. And we ended up having cars parked along the driveway halfway down the road. So my son figured we had about 60, 65 cars that first day. And we ended up having to turn people away for an hour or so until we kind of got people coming back in and leaving. So that's probably something we're going to have to continue in the future, is having my son out there directing the parking. As a matter of fact, we were always picked out every time we'd open. 10 o'clock was our opening time, and normally we were open until 6 or 7 in the evening. Well, just every day that we were open, we were closed and picked out by 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And then we'd have to close up for 2 or 3 days to get things ripened up again, which was a good thing. It helped with the spotted wing control. The fruit quality was just superb this year. And everything got picked up. So there was no rotten fruit in the field. It was just really exciting. I hope that in the future we'll be able to maintain that level of business, although as things start opening up, I kind of suspect it'll taper off a little bit. Maybe we can get back to a more normal schedule. In the past, we've like I said, started telling you, we send out picking pails with the customers. And hit the next slide, Joe, please. We kind of use, these are milk jugs, water jugs. We cut off the side and we use a nylon cord through the handle to tie around the waist, and it makes picking quite efficient. You got both hands to pick with. But in the past, on a busy day, we always had trouble keeping up with the cleaning operation. You got to rinse out the debris, wash them out with soap solution, rinse that out, dip them in Clorox, and then supposed to air dry them. And we decided we just can't keep up with that anymore. We'd already decided to eliminate it this year, and it's a good thing we did, because we could never have kept up with we don't have enough pails to meet the demand that we had this year. So we're not going to do these pails anymore. Instead, we just give out the cardboard trays. They hold 8 pints, and that's good enough. And we put this on our website or on our Facebook page to show people how to make one of those if they want to use them themselves. But that kind of presents another problem, because some people are super clean. They wash them up, they bring them, they're nice and clean. And other people, they don't clean them. They were bringing in their own pails, and they're full of dirt sometimes. And I don't know, it's just something we're going to have to figure out how to deal with. I know some people don't allow anything in the field other than their trays and pints, so we may have to go to that. So there's one of our trays of polka. It's a real beautiful berry. And this year, we didn't know, we used to allow people to bring the trays and the pints back and reuse them if they looked halfway decent. And we didn't do that last year. We gave them new stuff every time. And I'm pretty sure that's how we're going to continue doing that. And I'm looking forward to 2021. It's probably going to be kind of another crazy year, but crazy is good. We had a great season. Picked more fruit than we've ever done, and looking forward to 2021 season. Thanks for listening to me. Where do we go from here?
Thank you, Jim. Is there anything you want to add to that before we move on to Guy?
No, just interested to see what a big guy does.
All right. Guy Moore, unmute yourself, and you're next.
Okay, go ahead.
Good evening. My name's Guy Moore. This is my daughter Emily beside me here. Our farm is 40 miles northeast of Washington, D.C. We have about 250 acres of crop, fruits and vegetables. We start in the spring with strawberries, go through the season, finishing with apples and pumpkins. And during that time, we have about 10 acres of brambles we sell. How COVID affected our operation this year is, yeah, the biggest single thing it did, it allowed us to go from weight sales to volume sales. And, uh, and Emily will speak on that in half a second here. I'm going to talk for another 20 seconds and I'll be quiet. Uh, the, the customers seem to be so much eager to be out and about and do things because they could on the farm, whereas elsewise, they couldn't eat out anymore. They couldn't go to dinners anymore. So farm business, as Jim was saying, our volume of sales picked up way up. So Emily, why don't you talk about how we handle our volume sales in the raspberry field, in the bramble fields?
Yeah, so like Guy said, we grow about 10 acres of brambles, 5 to 6 of those being blackberries. And then we also grow both spring and fall red raspberries. And we have about a 1/4 acre of black raspberries. Like you said, we switched over from a by weight sale system to a volume sale. And the methods that changed a little bit was we used to do sales after the picking. We would weigh the whatever container. They could bring their own, they could use ours. We charge by the pound. In switching over to a volume sale, we charge them for the container before they go into the field. They can always come back and purchase more, but typically they purchase the size container they want to fill. They go out, pick, and then leave. We did it for a couple of reasons. One, we have a very large customer traffic, I would consider, and we were concerned about our employees having to handle things that the customers had touched, picked into, and handled, and then our staff has to handle them, and then we have to hand it back to the customer. Because we do our sales outside in what we call mobile checkout stands, which are essentially little pavilions that we retrofit under wagon basis so we can move them from place to place. We wanted to make sure that because we were away from sinks and bathrooms and places where you could really clean and wash your hands other than a hand sanitizer, we wanted to limit the amount of contact that our staff and customers had back and forth. And also the volume sales allowed us to apply limits to the number of customers per container that can enter the field. In pick your own, depending on your crowd and the size of your operation, I think everyone experiences what we like to call grazers or snackers, which are customers who come out to the property, spend a lot of time, maybe fill their bellies, and then they don't fill the box or your wallet as the seller. So we have had a problem with that in the past, which involves a lot of direct to customer contact, going out into the field, talking to those people, explaining the system. And you always, I think, in customer service, try really hard to avoid the negative conversation. And no matter how you do that, it's going to be a negative conversation, which is stop eating and pay me money for the stuff that you're eating. So in doing a volume sale, you counteract that right off the bat. They pay you when they walk into the field. So whether they put that fruit in the basket or in their stomach, it doesn't really matter. You're being paid for it.
We get the money up front. That was the biggest thing. So before they step 1 foot into the field, they've already paid, and we find that all of a sudden they're much more conscientious in the field. They're better pickers. They mind their children. The customers, moms and dads, mind their children better. A lot less trash in the field. It's been a very wonderful experience.
Yeah, so we did offer, we offer 2 to 4 size options depending on the crop. In brambles, we actually sold our brambles together. So because the fields are adjacent, when we had both blackberries and raspberries in season, they could mix them in the container if they wanted or keep them separate. So our pricing was universal. We sold a pint green pulp box like the ones that Jim had in his photos for $5 each. They allowed 1 person into the field. We sold a green pulp quart for $10 that allowed in 2 people. And then we sold a 4-quart flat for 35 and 3 people, and a 8-quart flat for 50, which allowed in 5 people. We tried to scale our pricing evenly, so customers didn't feel cheated one way or another. And the reason for the price increase on the 4 and the 8-quart flat is, if you've done pick your own, you've seen the box doesn't come out level full, it comes out heaping full. So really in a 4-quart flat, you end up getting more like 5 or 6, which is why we price things that way. Like Guy said, we found it reduced the trash in our fields fantastically. You used to get, broken containers, bags that they brought from home, grocery totes, things like that in the field all the time. Typically, it would take our staff about 30 to 45 minutes at the end of every day to walk the field and keep it clean. And with this volume sale, the fact that the only container they have is one that they paid for, it fills up and it walks out with them. So we found a lot of cleanliness in the field. We, dollar for dollar, it worked out pretty similar. What we tried to do was pick those containers, weigh them, and then determine with our price per pound last year what we thought that would be in this container system. And then of course you round it off a little bit. So it ended up being about the same, but our customers really appreciated the transparency of it. You do occasionally pick your own, get the, oh my gosh, that's 30 pounds. I thought I only picked 10. I only wanted to pay for 10. I don't want to pay for 30. And you can't put the fruit back on the plant, as we know. So having the transparency of it was really helpful for the customers. And they preferred the convenience of it. It shortened our lines drastically because you didn't have to get the container, weigh the container, get it back to them. It did shorten the lines a little bit as well. We really intend to keep the system moving forward. We did it for almost all of our crops with very few exceptions, like pumpkins. And it's been universally good all the way around. We have in our main market area, we did have around 4 sinks that were hooked up and plumbed. We tripled that amount this year to kind of help with COVID. We've normally had hand sanitizer stations out in the field. We doubled that as well to kind of help with that. We were both in a state and a county, as well as our own personal decisions, required people to wear masks the entire time they were on the property, whether they were inside or outside, socially distanced or not. So kind of Jim touched on that in his presentation as well. Signs everywhere. We have a website, a phone recording, a Facebook page, an Instagram, and our Google listing, all of which we posted our COVID rules, which was you had to have your mask on all the time, no exceptions. And having that consistency, and then also we have a large staff of around 70 people, having the staff build into that consistency as well is really important. You can't really stand there without a mask on and tell someone you have to wear your mask. So signage consistency, policy consistency, and we work really hard to let the customers know before they step onto the property exactly how it's going to go. And with COVID bringing in a whole big new crowd, that was really helpful, because having all that information out there and accessible to people and reinforced multiple times, they didn't come up and say, I'm new here, I don't know what's going on, how do I do this? Having that background information allowed them to come up and have a conversation with you about what you're picking and how you got it that way and what it's going to mean for them, which is a much more pleasant conversation to have than here are the rules. So signage is super, super important. We print all of our policy signs on 3 by 8 foot banners, which we hang up in various locations around our property. Minimal wording, really clear, concise messages. Whenever we get a sign printed up, it goes to the whole management team, which is around 8 people, of Does this wording make sense to you? Can it be viewed in a different way than we intended? You know, how are we gonna set this up so it is clear and concise to everyone who doesn't have our background knowledge? Um, and we also did a lot of change in traffic patterns, especially in our farm market. We sort of forced one-way traffic with both the way our displays are set up and then also with signage and arrows and things like that. It all became one way, one point of contact. We changed our point of sale system a little bit to try and minimize cash and increase contactless credit card payments, which helped a lot in terms of staff to customer interactions. We put up plexiglass shielding on all of our checkout stands, both mobile and in our barn, to sort of add that extra layer of protection for our staff and customers. Do you have anything else you want to add?
Only other thing I would add to that is I spend most of my time on the tractor doing production. So what I noticed when I was coming on weekends to help with sales is that people were just so happy to be able to get outside and get on the farm and actually have some semblance of normalcy in their lives. I think we provided such a huge outlet for people to actually say, yes, they are still alive, they are still breathing in, and hopefully there's light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah, I think people really enjoyed it. They had a lot of fun. And one of the things that I would suggest to any pick your own operation, if you can, is definitely crop diversity. We try to always have at least 2 to 3 crops, whether it's fruits, multiple fruits, fruits and vegetables, fruits, vegetables, and flowers, available to pick so that when your customer comes out, they have a full experience and you're just giving them opportunities to spend more money and to draw them in for a longer period of time. And you have the opportunity to maybe upsell a little bit, whether it's in your farm market or you do pick your own wildflowers. Or when you're selling raspberries, you have a little strip of spinach next to it and they go, oh, well, I'm here. Might as well get a bag of spinach or something like that. So definitely crop diversity and trying to get away from that. They can only come out and do one thing, so that's all they're gonna do. I think that's
Right.
it for us.
All right, thank you. Thank you both. As you went on, as you were talking, I was coming up with questions, and then as you kept talking, you answered them. So that was great.
Oh, good.
Connie. Yeah, it's like, oh, I want to hear about this, and then you told me. So that was great. Connie, let's move on to you. And again, after we hear from all 3 panelists, we'll have questions and discussion.
Great. All right, so as Debbie mentioned, I work for the Produce Safety Alliance. So I'm an extension educator. Of course, I'm going to have some slides to show you. These slides were put together by Betsy Ben. She's the director of the Produce Safety Alliance. She's not here with us today, but I listed her name here just to give her credit for the slide content. Also wanted to let you know that these slides are available on the Whova app under the Documents button. So feel free to download the slides. All the documents that I offer as references in this PowerPoint are hyperlinked. So you can just click on them and it'll take you right to the websites. So there are lots of goals on the farm about COVID. The first, we want to protect our employees. And I think both our growers give really good examples of what they've done on the farm to protect employees, customers, and the operation as a whole. We want to make sure that we're using science to guide our decision-making and the implementation of practices. We want to reduce the likelihood for contamination and then the spread of contamination, maintain business quality, integrity, and income. And then finally, follow the regulatory requirements. So again, I work for the Produce Safety Alliance. We have the curriculum that helps you satisfy the requirement of the produce safety rule. So if your farm is covered by the produce safety rule, likely someone from your farm has attended our grower training. So a lot of what I can talk about is what the requirements are of that federal regulation, which is also based on gaps. So that's what these comments are based on. Just to make sure we're all on the same page though, as far as COVID-19 transmission, it's primarily respiratory droplets and prolonged close contact. So that's why we recommend that 6-foot social distancing, and that if people don't have masks on for some reason, that they're not around each other for very long. We're not as concerned with contaminated surfaces. So it's not as easy to transmit COVID that way, but we are going to talk about cleaning and disinfecting surfaces because that is important. COVID can remain viable on surfaces for a period of time. It's just not an easy way to transmit it. This image comes from the East Alabama Medical Center. It just, again, gives you kind of a visual of why it's important to wear masks. And I'm sure you've heard it's important. I wear a mask to protect you, but if we're both wearing masks, that's going to give us the lowest possibility of transmission. So that's why we want everybody on the farm to wear masks. And again, I think both the growers that went before me talked about the importance of wearing masks. We'll all be glad when we don't have to wear them anymore, but that is one of the best things we can do right now to lower that probability of transmission. So let's talk about ways to beat COVID-19. And a lot of these things, again, you're already doing these on the farm. It's a lot of the same things we're already doing to meet the requirements of the produce safety rule. It's what we're already doing for good agricultural practices. So you have worker training programs. This is just one more thing to include in your worker training program. You have sanitation programs. This might just be a little bit different. You might need to use a higher chlorine concentration in your water, for example, to wipe down surfaces. You already have a farm food safety plan. This is just another thing you can include in it. Even though COVID is not a food safety risk, it's an easy place to incorporate that on the farm. You have your visitor policies. That's one of the requirements of the produce safety rule, is that you make your visitors aware of your policies. And again, I think both the growers that went before me talked about, using signage, making sure that when customers come to the farm, they're aware of your expectations. Being able to get those out on your website, on social media, really helps so that when they get to the farm, they know what to expect. And that goes right into your communication strategy. How are you going to share that information? And then the last thing to keep in mind is to have a crisis management plan. What are you going to do if something goes wrong? What are you going to do if the media shows up? So they happen can really help reduce that stress. Again, we want to base everything on science. So we're going to communicate science-based expectations. And that's important for both our workers and our customers, making sure that they know what those expectations are, making sure they understand what's based on science, because there's so much information out there in the media and on social media that's misleading or false. So it's important as growers to make sure that we're sharing that science-based information. What we know from science as effective ways to reduce COVID-19 transmission, again, wearing masks, wearing face coverings, making sure we wear them properly. They go over the nose, not just over the mouth. Maintaining social distance of at least 6 feet. Washing and or sanitizing hands frequently. Again, that's something that most of our growers were already doing before COVID hit. So this is just one more thing. Don't touch your face. And then clean and sanitize commonly touched surfaces. And like I said, this might be a little bit more than what we were doing previously, but we're already on the right track. So that's fantastic. I wanted to draw attention to this website. This is the Institute for Food Safety at Cornell University. Again, if you download the slides from the Whova app, you can just click on this image and it'll take you right to the website. But I wanted to draw your attention to just a couple of the links. The food industry resources, there's a lot of really great stuff on that page. And then also the resources by commodity. So there's a whole section there of resources directed at produce growers. So I encourage you to check out both of those pages. There are a lot of new resources that were developed in the last year. Here are just 3. On the right, you see that produce related resources page I just mentioned. So again, that's going to give you the latest from CDC. It's going to give you the latest from a lot of our departments of ag, Department of Labor. So that's a fantastic resource. The one in the middle, that's NC State Extension. They have a whole page devoted to COVID-19 resources. Primarily, you're going to scroll down till you get to the farm and packing house section. But again, if you have retail operations on the farm, they have a whole section of retail that might also apply to you. And then finally on the left, Cornell Small Farms Program has a great page on best management practices for U-Pick farms. So again, I think those are, if I had to limit my recommendations to just 3, it would be these 3 pages. As both the growers mentioned, it's important to designate flow and make sure that both our employees and our customers, have arrows to follow. Again, that they understand that we want them to social distance. So things like having arrows, signage, that's really helpful. That are also harvesting, thinking about them as cohorts. So if they can't work alone, again, encourage social distancing and wearing of masks. But if they have to work in teams, keep those teams separate from each other. So it's not everybody mixing together all the time. That way, if somebody does get sick, it's less likely to take out all your workers at once. Again, policies are really important. We want to make sure we're following them and enforcing them for both our workers and customers. And again, as was already mentioned, I feel like I'm just summarizing what's already been said. Make sure those expectations are clear and concise. And that'll also help you think through what's really going to work. How am I going to get this message across to my workers and my customers? Once the policy is written, everyone should be trained to the policy. And it's important that the farm owners and managers really set the example. And that includes anybody from the family that might be on the farm. So if you've got kids running around, or if your in-laws help you on the weekends, they also need to be aware of the policy and set that good example. And then we must enforce all policies, both for our employees and those customers. And for employees, you could have a reward system. It doesn't have to be something big, but a pat on the back that thank you for following the policies. You're doing a great job. If somebody's not following the policies, you might have to think through some negative consequences. Effective training is really the best investment. Again, that's something that we're already doing, but in this time of COVID-19, it really, really is important to include COVID-19 expectations in that training. This will help our employees understand what our expectations are, and it really helps to build a company-wide food safety culture so everybody's on the same page. It's also important to provide resources. Most people at this point have masks, but if they still show up to the farm and they don't have one, oh, I didn't bring a mask. Well, if you have some available for purchase, then they don't have an excuse, right? They will buy a mask in order to go out and pick. We have to provide hand washing stations. And also everybody mentioned you have hand sanitizing stations. That's fantastic. But the requirement as far as the produce safety rule is that you have to have hand washing stations. It's also important to clean and sanitize those frequently touched surfaces and train employees how to do it properly, and then provide them with the necessary resources. So that's detergents, it's sanitizers, it's gloves. Again, the same things we've already been doing might just require a little bit of extra attention. And then think about those challenges and develop a plan ahead of time. So you may have employees who choose not to wear a face mask properly, or they take it off all the time. What are you going to do if that happens? Are you going to send them home for the day? So that's something you want to think through ahead of time. You may have customers who don't want to wear a cloth face covering or not wearing it properly. Are you going to have people out in the fields policing that? Again, I think our growers gave some really good examples of how they explain that expectation to growers and make sure it's enforced. Be prepared to answer questions about your farm policies. That's really important that you can explain, again, based on science, why our policies are what they are. What are you going to do if someone has been to your operation and then they call and let you know that now they tested positive? right? Do you have a system in place to alert your workers? That's something to think through ahead of time. And again, you may have the media show up. It's a really good idea to have someone on the farm with a little bit of media training that could be the media person who's going to be prepared to talk to the media if they show up or call. And then finally, follow the science as it evolves. So there's a ton of information online. Again, those websites I shared earlier are great places to go to stay up to date on this information. Make sure that you are finding trusted sources and not just something that your aunt posted on Facebook. Many people are working in the industry as well as the land-grant universities to help keep everyone informed with this latest science-based information. And on the right here, I've got one of those fact sheets from Cornell University and the Produce Safety Alliance that again really gives you some succinct, clear information about what to do to stay safe at work, at home, if you're traveling in a shared vehicle, etc. And that's all I have. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you very much, Connie. That was great. You know, it's really nice to see it summarized like that, and to something that can be adaptable or important for every farm, that no matter what their scale. So that is great. So we've got a few questions, and I have a few questions. I wanted to ask, you mentioned what, you know, yes, you have customers or staff that are, I guess we call non-compliant. They don't wear their masks, they take them off, they hang them from one ear. And it's easier to control your staff because you can fire them, or you can send them home. But I'm curious to know from the growers how you all handle that. Because, you know, I walk into the supermarket and I see people walking around without their masks off, and it drives me crazy. And I'm thinking, like, you know, come on, people. And then I'm waiting to see if somebody's going to shoot me if I do that. But, you know, I'm just another customer. So I want to ask Guy and Jim how you have handled people who show up and ignore your rules.
Jim, you want to talk that first?
Okay. Oh, we didn't have too much trouble with that. Most people wore them. We did have one group of two ladies who were kind of stubborn about it, and I explained to them, I said, you know, if you expose us to it, we're going to have to close the farm up. We won't be able to be open. They kind of begrudgingly turned around, went back to the car and got their masks. Other than that, I don't think we had any other problems. People were really appreciative of the fact that we were taking special cares to keep them safe. And people were just tickled to be outside and doing something other than sitting in the house. So they were eager to comply with what it took. Right?
We had maybe just a handful of people throughout the whole season who were very belligerent about not wearing a mask. And we told them they were not allowed into the field without a mask. And we had masks, we'd be happy to sell them. But if they wanted to come and shop at our farm, they had to have a mask on. And so if they didn't put a mask on, they had to go home.
Mm-hmm. Did I talked to one farmer in Southern Virginia, in the Virginia Beach area, a strawberry grower, who early on, and of course strawberry season was early in the pandemic, decided to implement a mask required policy at his farm. And he checked with other strawberry growers in his area and said, look, what if we all do this? You know, why don't we all do this? And he didn't get any response, or not enough response. So he just went ahead and did it on his own farm, and discovered that customers were delighted. Customers were relieved to know that the farm had a mask required policy, and they felt safer to come there. And so for him, it turned out to be, you know, a benefit, you know, a marketing tool. You know, we're the farm that requires masks, you know you can feel safe to come here. And I thought that was pretty interesting to hear that. You know, if you're in a state where it's required, then you can just say, well, I am sorry, you know, Maryland requires it or North Carolina requires it, but it wasn't required in Virginia, at least not at that time. But you know, people flocked to his farm because of it. So we have one question from one of our folks here saying, you know, she says, what's one of the hardest things she's found is dealing with the public, and in terms of just sort of general food safety aspects. And so she asked, what have others found that works best with your consumers? And do you think that your consumers will maintain some of the things you sort of trained them to do, perhaps just in terms of clean containers and hand washing and things, you know, after COVID? You know, the places where people do seem to be reluctant. I'll send that to Jim first.
Will they keep doing what we've asked them to do now? I think as long as we stay consistent, I think they will. If we start dodging around here, there, and everywhere with different requirements from place to place, then they're going to get confused. I think we need to be consistent.
I
think there's no denying that COVID is real and it has a horrible impact on everybody, you know, all over the world. And these are some of the things that we can do to help prevent this. And so I think any reasonable person is willing to do it, and will maybe begrudgingly, you know, somewhat begrudgingly, but to say, well, yeah, I understand that this is what we need to do.
The world seems to be full of a lot of unreasonable people. They must not be coming to your farm. So consider yourself lucky.
But pick your stuff. You just have to. It's like going to church. You know, 5% of people do all the work for the other 95%, and the other 95% complain bitterly about the work the 5% do. So, but pick your own. You know, you're always going to have people who are unhappy, but they're only 5%, and the other 95% of your customers are tickled to death to be there.
Connie, a question for you. Do you see any conflict between the COVID adaptations that people are being asked to make and the recommendations that are made for just existing good agricultural practices? You're going to have to unmute. There you go.
Yeah. So we get that question a lot. And again, we're already doing a lot of the right things. This is just, it seems to be in addition to gaps. So there are a couple other things that we do different, like the mask wearing and the social distancing. But none of the requirements for COVID are in conflict with gaps. It's just, it's a little more stringent. Like I mentioned before, for example, if you use bleach in water for sanitizer, for COVID, we're just using a higher concentration. So it's the same practice as before. It's just if you're following those good agricultural practices, you're already on the right track. And if you're adding additional steps to reduce the transmission of COVID, you're not taking anything away from your existing gaps. Good question.
So I had another question. What you probably have worked with or talked to some farms who have had workers get sick, and what's, you know, sort of what are the protocols or what are people doing about that, and particularly what are they doing when it hits the press? Because that, you know, that can make people think, oh, I don't want to go to that place. Oh, they're, you know, it's a hotbed of COVID. So.
Are you asking me or one of the growers?
I'm asking you because I'll ask you because you probably, you may not be in touch with farms after the case. So if you don't know, just say, just say so. So.
Yeah, the farms that I'm aware of, it's similar to like a food establishment. if someone comes down with COVID, it's that contact tracing. Who else have they been around? If have they been wearing their masks? So that's when it gets risky, is, for example, if employees take lunch together and so they've been without masks for more than 15 minutes. And if somebody tests positive, then everybody else that they were around maskless for more than 15 minutes has to get tested, and may have to quarantine until they get those results back. So again, as far as assuring customers that we're doing everything we can, it's being transparent with what our policy is. If an employee comes down with COVID, here's the steps we take to make sure that we're keeping our workers and our customers from catching it.
Okay. Guy, you probably have a large enough staff. Did you have any incidents of people at your farm getting sick that you had to deal with?
We were very, very fortunate in that none of our family and or staff ever came down with COVID. It's, it was always, Uncle Sam over here, his niece got COVID, but she's 30 miles, northeast, but directly affecting her immediate family and or staff. Fortunately, none of the people in our sphere got COVID.
Okay. So we have a question from Dale Allen Riggs. Does anybody use appointments for customers to reduce the likelihood of people being turned away? And I guess I'll ask that to you, Guy, because you're a larger farm. Probably have, people crowding in.
We did not do any appointments. Early on with strawberry season, we were almost overrun with customers, and in hindsight, so we wish we'd have done appointments. But I know other farms are doing appointments. We feel for our operation that is not a necessary option to go to at this point.
And I've asked Dale if that's something that you did. If you want, since you can't speak, if you want to type in what your policies were or what your experience was, I would be glad to share that with everybody. In the meantime, another question for Guy and for Jim. Did you end up raising your prices to pay for all the extra things you had to do, or because you had more demand?
Go ahead, Jim.
Guy first, then Jim.
Yes. That's a good question. How can I answer it accurately? When we transitioned from per pound sales to a volume sale, we tried to, I think Emily touched on, we tried to match as evenly as possible. So, and again, you have that 2 or 3% of customers, do the math in their head and say, oh, you're charging more than you did before. And we say, well, we're just doing the best we can with to try to match as best we can. But the single biggest thing we did was by allowing only a certain number of customers per certain size container, that helped mitigate the crowds in the field and keep people spread out. We did not have a significant increase in prices from one year to next year.
Okay. Jim, how about you? Did you feel like increase your expenses, or it was a way to control demand to have higher prices? Anything change in prices?
Well, we'd been at $3.50 a pint for a couple of years, and we ended up raising it to $3.75 a pint. So we went up 25 cents a pint.
I imagine
Nobody
you didn't
said
have any
anything.
complaints.
Hey, Jim.
Yes.
You should be at 5.25 easy. 5.25 a pint easy. Just do it. Just do it.
Well, we don't live right next to DC, so I don't know. We're pretty close to Ann Arbor. So.
Just do it. Just do it.
Jim, do you keep track of what the prices are of other people in your area, in your region? Are you like in the middle with everybody else, or are you
I've
an
pretty much
outlier?
I've always been high compared to most of the other people in our area, so. We don't have a lot of you-pick raspberry places in my area. The closest one is, probably 30 miles to the east, and the next one is 50 miles to the north.
Jim, what you sell is,
So,
I'm sorry, Debbie, Jim, what you sell is a day on the
go ahead,
farm.
go ahead.
I'm
What's
sorry.
Go ahead.
I'm going to be quiet.
Oh, okay. So yeah, it's very regional. I mean, that's one thing we've noticed by doing pricing surveys, that prices tend to be really high in one area and really low in another. We hope that pricing surveys will make that the people who are really low notice that everybody else in their area is like $1 or $2 more, and why should they be undercutting them and why should they be losing money? But it does
Yeah,
vary a lot. In blackberries south are really, so compared to what blackberries are up north, blackberries are cheap down here. So I got another comment here saying she thinks they could charge $1 more per pound, pick your own, during the demand and appreciation and demand for our berries because of COVID. I don't know what her base is, but $1 more per pound than normal is a pretty good jump. So I wondered if anybody did drive-through sales, where people could just drive up, say what they want, get handed their berries through the window of the car. That's something that a farm around here did. It certainly minimized contact. It's like going to the bank. And again, if any of you folks who are responding in Q&A want to make comments on these things, go for it.
We did not do that.
Okay.
We don't have the picking force to do that.
Somebody tried to buy strawberries. I found it difficult. So you could get in line for their strawberries, then you get there and they'd be sold out. So we have a comment here with response for request. Dale Alice Riggs says, we used appointments for our fall raspberries because they are grown in a high tunnel with limited space. We did not have appointments for our blueberries because we felt that we had enough space for people to spread out. And by the way, we got $5.50 a pint for no spray raspberries, minimum of 6 pints required. So, and again, those are, I guess, raspberries grown in tunnels and protected from SWD and unsprayed. So that sounds great. Other comments, other questions from panelists or from our audience here? Glad to take more questions. We've got a minute or two left. Okay. And again, I'll remind everybody that Connie has shared that slideshow as a resource that's available. Presume, Connie, it's posted on the Hoover website as a link or PDF there, so people can go to that page to find it. Here we go. Kathy's saying she charged $4.50 a pound in 2020, so she went up from $4.50 to $5.50, which if you work that out, it's something like a 20% increase. So it's a pretty good increase to do. Kathy, tell us, do you expect to stay at that price in 2021, the higher price? Do you expect to drop back at all when COVID is over? I bet you don't. Give her a minute to answer that.
Never go down.
Never go down, right? Never lower your price. They'll never remember. They'll never remember what it was before. All right. I'm going to guess that that's the case. She's never going to lower that price back down. Why would she? So, Anybody else have any further comments here? Because otherwise I think I'll wrap it up here. And I want to thank all three of you and Jill, who's there in the background, for being part of this panel here. We have posted a lot of resources on the NARBA website about COVID. We started doing that in the spring. They kept changing. We kept adding more, and we'll be, watching for any additional information that comes out and try to share it with growers this year. It was certainly a madhouse in the spring, as we tried to find out what was the best information and tried to share it. And like Connie, we found that information from New York and North Carolina tended to be among the clearest and most concise, and we often steered people to those. But we also were aware that there was differing rules in different states, so we would try to find the COVID rules from the different states, and share those so that people knew what they were. I know in Maryland, you all were watching to make sure that pick your own was even going to be allowed. It's great that it was recognized that this is, and Michigan too, that this is real food. This is, as good a place to buy your food as the grocery store. So I think that that's really a blow in favor of farms, for people to be recognized that, small farms, pick your own farms, roadside stands are serious purveyors of food, that they're not just entertainment or, picking up chocolate bars or something. So thank you all very much. I will return you back to the Hoover website.